I thought I'd lost everything, my lake ranch, my family's legacy, even my freedom. Karen Hendricks had convinced the entire neighborhood I was a fraud, a thief who'd stolen property that rightfully belonged to her son. The police were at my door, handcuffs gleaming in the morning sun. But what Karen didn't know was that I'd been 3 steps ahead of her from the very beginning. And when the truth came out in that courtroom, it would destroy not just her carefully crafted lies, but the entire corrupt system she built around herself. My name is David Martinez, and I've been living on Pine Lake for 37 years. My grandfather built this ranch with his own hands back in 1952, and when he passed, he left it to me along with something far more valuable, a detailed understanding of every property line, every easement, and every legal document that governed our small lakeside community. I never thought I'd need that knowledge to fight for my own home. It started innocuously enough. 3 years ago, Karen Hendricks moved into the neighborhood as the new HOA president. She was the type of woman who could smile while sliding a knife between your ribs. All perfectly manicured nails and passive-aggressive southern charm. Within months, she transformed our quiet community into her personal kingdom, complete with arbitrary fines, surveillance cameras, and a network of neighborhood spies who reported directly to her. But Karen made one crucial mistake. She assumed that because I kept to myself, working my small cattle operation and maintaining the family property, I was just another pushover neighbor she could manipulate. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was checking my mailbox when I found an official-looking letter from the county assessor's office. My hand shook as I read the contents. According to the document, my property taxes hadn't been paid in over 2 years, and the county was initiating foreclosure proceedings. That's impossible, I muttered, pulling out my phone to call my accountant. But before I could dial, Karen's voice rang out across the street. "Oh, David, I see you got the news." She was standing in her perfectly manicured front yard, holding a glass of what I assumed was her morning wine, wearing that predatory smile I'd come to know so well. "What news, Karen?" "Well, honey, it's such a shame about your little tax situation. But don't you worry, my son Bradley has been looking for investment property around the lake, and he's prepared to make you a very generous offer. Cash, of course. You could be out from under all this mess by the end of the week." The blood drained from my face. This wasn't coincidence. This was orchestration. "I've been paying my taxes, Karen. There's been some kind of mistake." Her laugh was like fingernails on glass. "Oh, sweetie, I know it's hard to accept, but numbers don't lie. The county records are very clear. You owe $47,000 in back taxes, plus penalties and interest. But like I said, Bradley's offer stands." That evening, I drove straight to the county courthouse. The clerk, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, who'd known my family for decades, pulled up my account with a frown. "Mr. Martinez, this is very strange. According to our records, your property taxes were redirected to a new mailing address 2 years ago. All the notices, all the bills, they've been going to a P.O. box registered to." She squinted at the screen. "K. Hendricks." My heart stopped. "Karen Hendricks, that's right. Says here she filed paperwork claiming to be your property manager, authorized to receive all tax correspondence on your behalf." The room spun around me. Karen hadn't just been planning to steal my property, she'd been actively sabotaging me. For 2 years, intercepting my tax bills and letting them pile up while I remained oblivious. I spent the next week in a panic, liquidating investments and borrowing against my 401k to pay the back taxes. But Karen wasn't done. 3 days after I settled with the county, she filed a complaint with the HOA claiming I'd been operating an illegal commercial cattle operation in violation of our community covenants. Then came the environmental complaints allegations that my cattle were polluting the lake. Next, she reported me to animal control for supposed neglect. Each complaint was investigated and dismissed, but the harassment was relentless. The final blow came on a humid Thursday evening in June. I was sitting on my porch, exhausted from another day of dealing with Karen's manufactured crises, when the police cars pulled into my driveway. Officer Martinez, no relation, Despite the name approached with a grim expression and a folded paper in his hand. David Martinez, you're under arrest for fraud and theft of services. What? Officer, there must be some mistake, sir. We have a complaint filed by the Homeowners Association stating that you've been living on this property illegally for the past 3 years. Claiming ownership of land that belongs to Bradley Hendricks, you have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around my wrists, I saw Karen standing in her yard, phone in hand, recording every moment of my humiliation. Her smile was triumphant, victorious. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my grandfather hadn't just left me property. He'd left me something far more powerful. The original HOA charter documents. The ones that predated Karen's presidency by 50 years. And buried in those documents was a clause that would change everything. Jail is a humbling experience for anyone. But when you're a 55-year-old rancher who's never so much as gotten a speeding ticket, it's devastating. I spent 3 days in a concrete cell, staring at graffitied walls and trying to understand how my life had been turned upside down so completely. My bail hearing was a nightmare. Karen sat in the gallery with her son Bradley, a soft-looking man in his 30s who couldn't meet my eyes. The prosecutor painted me as a con artist who'd been squatting on the Hendricks family property, using forged documents to maintain the deception. Your Honor, the prosecutor declared, Mr. Martinez has been perpetrating an elaborate fraud for years, claiming ownership of property that legally belongs to the complainant's son. The HOA has provided extensive documentation proving the legitimate chain of ownership. My court-appointed attorney was fresh out of law school, overwhelmed and underprepared. When the judge set bail at $50,000, I watched my freedom slip away until my neighbor Tom Morrison, one of the few people in our community who hadn't been completely poisoned against me, posted bond. The ride home was silent. Tom dropped me off at my ranch, the same property I'd grown up on, the same land where my grandfather had taught me to ride horses and fix fence posts. Now it felt like borrowed time. This is crazy, Dave, Tom said before he left. Everyone knows this is your place. Your family's been here longer than anyone. But everyone knowing doesn't matter when you're up against manufactured evidence and a corrupt system. That night, I sat in my grandfather's old study, surrounded by boxes of family documents I'd never bothered to organize, birth certificates, property deeds, tax records going back to the 1950s, that accumulated paperwork of a family's life. And that's when I found it, tucked inside a manila envelope marked HOA Original Charter. I discovered documents I'd never seen before. The original Pine Lake Community Charter, dated 1961, with my grandfather's signature as one of the founding members. But it wasn't just his signature that caught my attention, it was his title. Financial Administrator and Budget Controller. My hands trembled as I read the fine print. According to the charter, the financial administrator position was hereditary, passing to the eldest male descendant unless formally revoked by unanimous board vote. The position held significant powers, including budget approval, financial oversight, and most importantly, the authority to audit all HOA expenditures. Karen didn't know I was the legitimate financial administrator. She'd been operating under fraudulent authority for 3 years. The next morning, I drove to the office of Patricia Wild, the best property attorney in the county. She was expensive, but Tom had offered to help with legal fees, and I was desperate. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 60s who built her reputation dismantling HOA corruption cases. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. David, this is either the most elaborate frame job I've ever seen, or you're telling me one hell of a lie. It's not a lie. I have documentation going back 60 years. She studied the charter documents I brought, her eyebrows rising as she read. If these are legitimate and we'll have them authenticated, then Karen Hendricks has been operating outside her authority since day one. But that's just the beginning of our problems. We need to prove that Bradley's claim to your property is fraudulent. How do we do that? Patricia leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile crossing her face. We follow the money. HOA budgets are public record, and if I'm right about what's been happening here, there's going to be a very interesting paper trail. The next 2 weeks were a blur of investigation and discovery. Patricia's team of forensic accountants dove into 3 years of HOA financial records. What they found was staggering. Karen hadn't just been harassing me, she'd been embezzling from the HOA for years. Fake contractor invoices, inflated maintenance costs, mysterious consulting fees paid to shell companies. Over $200,000 had disappeared from the community fund. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source, Karen's own security system. Patricia had subpoenaed all surveillance footage from the HOA's cameras, claiming it was necessary to establish my timeline of residence. What we got instead was Karen, captured in high definition, discussing her plan to force me off my property so Bradley could buy it below market value. The old fool has no idea what's coming, she said to Bradley in footage dated 6 months before my tax troubles began. Once we get him out, you can buy the property for back taxes. It's worth at least $500,000, and you'll get it for under $50,000. Bradley's response was equally damning. What if he fights it, Mom? Honey, by the time I'm done with him, he'll be so buried in legal problems he'll be begging to sell. We had her. We had both of them. The criminal fraud charges against me were dropped within days of Patricia presenting the evidence to the prosecutor. But Karen wasn't done fighting. When she realized her scheme was unraveling, she doubled down, filing a civil lawsuit claiming I'd stolen the surveillance footage and fabricated the evidence. That's when things got really interesting, because Patricia had one more card to play, one that even I didn't see coming. 3 days before our court hearing, she called me into her office with a manila envelope in her hand, and that same predatory smile I was learning to appreciate. David, you're not going to believe what we just discovered about the original property sale. The courthouse was packed on the morning of October 15th. Word had spread through Pine Lake community like wildfire. The quiet rancher was taking on the whole queen in what promised to be the most dramatic court battle our small town had ever seen. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Patricia, watching Karen and Bradley enter with their high-powered attorney from the city. Karen wore a navy blue suit and her most innocent expression, playing the role of concerned neighbor perfectly. Bradley looked nervous, constantly checking his phone and avoiding eye contact with anyone in the gallery. Judge Morrison, no relation to my neighbor Tom, called the court to order. The case was officially styled as Hendricks v. Martinez, declaratory judgment on property rights. But everyone in that room knew it was about much more than property lines. Karen's attorney, a slick man named Richardson, opened with a presentation that would have been convincing if I hadn't known the truth. Your Honor, my clients are victims of an elaborate deception. Mr. Martinez has been living on property that legally belongs to the Hendricks family, using forged documents and intimidation tactics to maintain his illegal occupation. He presented a stack of documents that looked official and impressive. Property deeds, tax records, even historical survey maps, all seemingly proving that my grandfather had sold the ranch to the Hendricks family in 1963. The defendant has spent years cultivating the image of a legitimate landowner, Richardson continued. But the evidence clearly shows that he's been perpetrating fraud on this community for decades. I felt my chest tighten as Richardson painted me as a master manipulator. When he finished, half the courtroom was looking at me like I was some kind of criminal mastermind. Then Patricia stood up. Your Honor, my client isn't just the victim of fraud, he's the victim of an organized conspiracy involving theft, embezzlement, and document forgery on a scale that will shock this court. She approached the evidence table with a cardboard box that contained our counter evidence. The plaintiff's case relies on forged documents, manufactured evidence, and testimony from individuals who have been stealing from their own community. For years, Patricia's first exhibit was the authenticated HOA charter, officially verified by 3 independent document experts. She walked Judge Morrison through the chain of ownership and my inherited authority as financial administrator. Your Honor, not only does Mr. Martinez legitimately own his property, but he has legal authority over the very organization that's been harassing him. Karen's face went white. Richardson objected, but Patricia was just getting started. Now, Your Honor, let's talk about the real crime here. The next hour was devastating. Patricia methodically presented the evidence of embezzlement, showing how Karen had systematically stolen from the HOA, while simultaneously harassing me to force a sale. The financial records were damning fake invoices, shell companies, mysterious cash withdrawals. But the moment that changed everything came when Patricia called her surprise witness. Your Honor, I'd like to call Mrs. Dorothy Patterson from the county assessor's office. Mrs. Patterson took the stand nervously, glancing at Karen before focusing on Patricia. Mrs. Patterson, can you tell the court about the irregularities you discovered in Mr. Martinez's tax account? Yes, ma'am. About 6 months ago, we started getting complaints from other property owners about their tax bills being redirected without authorization. When we investigated, we found that someone had been filing fake property manager authorizations using stolen letterhead. From the county clerk's office, Patricia presented the forged documents. And who filed these fraudulent authorizations? The signature says K. Hendricks, but when we compared it to other documents on file, Mrs. Patterson paused, looking directly at Karen. The handwriting analysis showed it was forged. The real Karen Hendricks' signature is completely different. The courtroom erupted. Karen shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking. That's impossible. I never forged anything. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Mrs. Hendricks, please sit down. But Richardson looked confused. Your Honor, I'm not sure what this proves. If my client didn't forge these documents, oh, she didn't, Patricia said with a smile. Bradley did. The blood drained from Bradley's face. Karen spun to stare at her son, realization dawning in her eyes. Patricia presented the final piece of evidence. Handwriting analysis comparing the forged tax documents to Bradley's employment records and loan applications. Bradley Hendricks has been forging his mother's signature for years, stealing from the HOA, and manipulating county records to force property sales. He's been using his mother as a front while he orchestrated the entire scheme. Karen stood up again, but this time it wasn't to object. She was staring at her son with a mixture of horror and betrayal. Bradley, tell them this isn't true. Bradley couldn't meet her eyes. His hand shook as he gripped the table in front of him. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we have bank records showing that all the embezzled funds were deposited into accounts controlled solely by Bradley Hendricks. Mrs. Hendricks may have been the face of this operation, but she was being manipulated by her own son. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Karen slowly sank into her chair. The reality of her situation finally hitting her, Judge Morrison reviewed the evidence for several minutes before speaking. This court will recess for 2 hours while I review these materials. When we return, I'll render my decision on the property dispute. However, I'm also ordering the bailiff to notify the district attorney's office immediately. There appear to be serious criminal matters that require investigation. As the gavel came down, Bradley finally looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. 2 hours felt like an eternity. I spent the recess in Patricia's office, trying to process what had just happened. Karen had been manipulated by her own son, but that didn't absolve her of 3 years of harassment and intimidation. Still, I couldn't help feeling a small measure of sympathy for a woman who discovered her child was using her to commit crimes. When court reconvened, the gallery was even more packed than before. Word had spread, and it seemed like half of Pine Lake had shown up to witness the conclusion of our community's biggest scandal. Judge Morrison entered with a thick folder of documents and a grim expression. Karen sat slumped in her chair, looking 10 years older than she had that morning. Bradley, meanwhile, had regained some of his composure and was whispering urgently with Richardson. After reviewing all the evidence presented, Judge Morrison began. This court finds that the plaintiff's case is built entirely on fraudulent documents and perjured Testimony. The property in question legally belongs to David Martinez and has belonged to the Martinez family continuously since 1952. Relief flooded through me, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds clear evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. I'm ordering immediate asset freezes on all accounts controlled by Bradley Hendricks and directing the sheriff's department to take him into custody pending criminal charges. The deputies moved toward Bradley, but he was already standing. Your Honor, wait, I have something to say. Richardson grabbed his client's arm. Bradley, don't, no, I'm done. Bradley shook off his attorney's grip and turned to face the court. Your Honor, I'm prepared to make a full confession, but first I need to tell the truth about what really happened here. Judge Morrison nodded. Proceed. But you should know that anything you say can be used against you in criminal proceedings. I understand. Bradley took a deep breath. Your Honor, I did forge my mother's signature. I did steal from the HOA, but there's something else you need to know. He turned to look at me directly for the first time since the trial began. Mr. Martinez, I'm sorry for what I put you through, but you weren't the only target. Over the past 3 years, I've forced 5 other families out of the Pine Lake community using the same methods. The Johnsons, the Williamses, the Chen family, all of them lost their homes because of my schemes. The courtroom gasped. I felt sick to my stomach. 5 families had been destroyed while I was fighting for my own survival. I've been buying their properties through shell companies that flipping them for massive profits. The total damage is probably close to $2 million. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Hendricks, are you saying you've been operating a systematic property theft? Wren? Yes, sir. And there's more. Bradley reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. Everything is on here. Bank records, forged documents, even recordings of meetings with the buyers I was working with. I kept detailed records of everything. Richardson looked like he was having a heart attack. Bradley stopped talking now, but Bradley ignored him. Your Honor, I'm prepared to cooperate fully with the authorities and make restitution to all my victims, but I need protection. The people I was working with, they're not going to be happy about this confession. Judge Morrison accepted the flash drive and ordered Bradley into protective custody. As the deputies led him away, he stopped in front of his mother. Mom, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Karen looked up at her son with tears in her eyes for a moment. I saw not the HOA tyrant who made my life hell, but a broken mother who just learned her child was a monster. I don't understand, she whispered. Why? Because I could, Bradley replied, and because no one was watching. As the courtroom cleared, Patricia and I stood in the hallway, trying to process what had just happened. I'd won my property back, but 5 other families had lost everything. Patricia, those other families Bradley mentioned, is there any way to help them? She nodded. With his confession and the evidence on that flash drive, we should be able to unwind most of his fraudulent transactions. It'll take time, but they might be able to get their homes back. 2 weeks later, the full scope of Bradley's operation came to light. The flash drive contained evidence of a sophisticated property theft ring involving Corrupt County officials, fraudulent appraisals, and forged documents. Bradley had been working with a larger organization that targeted rural communities across 3 states. His cooperation led to 18 additional arrests, including the county commissioner and the bank officials. The total amount stolen was eventually calculated at over $12 million. As for Karen, she was charged with money laundering and conspiracy, but her cooperation with the investigation and obvious victimization by her own son resulted in a plea deal involving restitution and community service rather than jail time. The real twist came 3 months later. I was sitting on my porch, finally enjoying the peace I'd fought so hard to protect, when Tom Morrison drove up with an official-looking envelope. Dave, this came to my house by mistake, he said, handing me the envelope. It's from some law firm in Chicago. Inside was a letter that made my hands shake. I was being sued by Bradley Hendricks' former partners for interfering with their business operations, according to their attorney. My refusal to sell my property had cost them millions in lost profits from their largest scheme. I called Patricia immediately. Well, she said after I read her the letter, "Looks like we're not done yet, but Dave, you've got something now that you didn't have before." "What's that?" "You've got me. You've got the truth, and you've got a community that finally knows what they're fighting for." Looking back on this whole experience, I learned something important. Sometimes the people trying to destroy you are being manipulated by someone even worse. Karen was terrible, but Bradley was evil, and sometimes fighting for your own justice means fighting for everyone's justice. My grandfather always said that land doesn't just belong to you, you belong to it, and you have a responsibility to protect it for the people who come after you. I protected my land, but more importantly, I helped protect my community, and I'm not done fighting yet. If you've been dealing with HOA harassment or property disputes, don't give up. Document everything. Know your rights, and remember sometimes the people with the most power are the ones with the most to hide. And if this story resonates with you, please share it. Justice only works when good people stand together.